Now today Vanity Fair released a rather lengthy article about the future of Star Wars titled "The Rebellion Will Be Televised," which, as you can probably guess, talks a lot about the upcoming Disney Plus shows, from the soon-to-be-released Kenobi to Andor, which will likely come out later this summer, to The Mandalorian Season 3, probably late this year, early next year, to Ahsoka sometime maybe next spring, all the way up to The Acolyte, which will probably be released next year sometime. And though there was certainly a lot of interesting information that could be discussed in relation to all of that, and likely will be by me tomorrow on my second channel, in this video I want to talk mainly about Star Wars movies, which, yeah, were mentioned in this article, though it was done at the very end, and almost like an afterthought, you could say, when Kathleen Kennedy simply said of them that they have a roadmap. But as for what that roadmap may look like or where it's heading, well, that we don't know. Not even much of a general trajectory was even revealed, which is kind of surprising since Star Wars is a franchise built on films and that, love or hate them, the sequel trilogy did rake in the money, and certainly, shall we say, less divisive set of films could rake in similar amounts of money and potentially make plenty more off merchandising. One would almost even think, after now 2.5 years since the last film, that being The Rise of Skywalker, that there were plans in place to get back to the point of roughly at least one film a year, especially when you consider Marvel tends to crank out 2 to 3 films a year. But according to this Vanity Fair article, what it speculates is that the next one up will likely be the Taika Waititi project, whatever that may turn out to be, though perhaps we'll get some details on it at Celebration next week. And that will then at some point be followed up by Rogue Squadron, which was supposed to be out in December of 2023, but was delayed due to scheduling issues or conflicts with writer-director Patty Jenkins. Kennedy in this article was then asked what was going on with the Kevin Feige Star Wars film, or asked if it's true he'll be producing a film, and she responded, "I would love to see what movie he might come up with, but right now, no, there isn't anything specifically." Which is a rather strange answer for a few reasons, one of which considering it was only last week that we learned that work on it was finally moving along, at least according to writer Michael Waldron, who worked with Kevin Feige and wrote Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and is now working with Feige on this Star Wars film, even saying of it in an interview last week that, "We're finally into it in earnest. I mean, I'm writing away. It's a lot of fun. I'm enjoying having the freedom on that to do something that's not necessarily a sequel or anything. It maybe has a little bit less of it just doesn't have a bunch of TV shows and movies that you're servicing on top of it the way I did with Doctor Strange. So it's nice. It feels like a different exercise." And not only does this sort of contradict what Kennedy said about it not even being worked on specifically, though it's quite possible she was interviewed for this article weeks, if not months ago, long before Waldron said this and work finally began, but it also makes it sound like this movie will be its own thing, detached from other Star Wars films and shows or projects, that it will be set apart from everything else that's being done right now or has been done before. Which then kind of conflicts greatly with what we've been hearing a lot lately out of Lucasfilm, including from Dave Filoni.
Again, that's what fans want. They want one connected universe.
Even in this very article, Kennedy is quoted as saying, "What's unique about Star Wars is that we're one story, basically. George was always dealing with episodes. Ironically, he was serializing his storytelling. He was influenced by Flash Gordon and cliffhangers on Saturdays at movie theaters." And sure, none of that means they can't or won't or shouldn't do sort of one-off films or shows on Disney Plus not connected too much to the rest of Star Wars, or that you don't want to move to completely different times and places to keep broadening that overall story of Star Wars that they're talking about. Certainly, if Star Wars is going to survive for decades into the future, it will have to keep branching out or broadening its horizons and expanding. But one could almost ask, especially with the current success of the Mandalorian era or the post-Return of the Jedi era on Disney Plus, which this article talks a lot about, why not make a film connected to all of that? What's really the point or attraction of doing a sort of one-off movie every few years that has nothing to do with the rest of what's currently going on in Star Wars or currently going on in the shows? Which isn't to say that such a movie couldn't or wouldn't be good in and of itself or anything, but you do have to wonder how interested the more casual fan or average moviegoer is going to be in such a film, especially when they're used to and seem to enjoy the interconnectivity of something like the MCU, how its story spans across all its films and shows, and it's all related in some respect. Are fans or non-fans really going to want to see or go to a movie just because it's set sometime and someplace in the Star Wars galaxy? And I mean, sure, you can look at the success of Rogue One as a sort of one-off or standalone film and say that's proof films outside a trilogy can work. And it should be noted that Kennedy in this article said that, "I hesitate to use the word trilogies anymore because Star Wars is much more about persistent storytelling, meaning don't expect any sort of new trilogy anytime soon, and more on a particular promised trilogy in a minute." But getting back to Rogue One and the success it had for a second, yes, many, myself included, thought it was a great film, the best Star Wars film released under Disney. But it did have a couple things going for it, one being that it is actually heavily connected not only to the rest of Star Wars, but to the original Star Wars film itself, with the stealing of the Death Star plans mentioned in the opening crawl. It even has Darth Vader right in the film and, of course, in the marketing. Not to mention, it was just the second new Star Wars film, or second film to come out in the Disney era, meaning the excitement to just have Star Wars back was still very much alive and well within the masses. But that hype or excitement level for Star Wars, just because it was Star Wars, didn't last very long, and some level of connectivity to the rest of Star Wars, or using a familiar character, was not enough to make Solo a financial success. And Kennedy does mention that film in this article or interview, saying of the idea to recast Han Solo that it does seem so abundantly clear that we can't do that. Meaning, don't expect too many future recastings, and it does throw into question how likely we are to actually see the announced Lando series. But anyway, another thing Kennedy talks about, which seems to go against this idea of one-off or separate films, despite it appearing as if that's what they're going to do, was her saying that anyone who comes into the Star Wars universe needs to know that it's a 3, 4, 5-year commitment. That's what it takes. You can't step in for a year and shoot something and then walk away. It requires that kind of nurturing. And though I certainly do agree with and appreciate the thought and sentiment here, I just wish that had been the idea from the very start, or with the sequels, that they would have gotten a small team together who wanted to commit themselves to the whole project, the whole trilogy, and not try to bring in different filmmakers for each film in the trilogy. Which then finally brings us to what Kathleen Kennedy said when asked about Rian Johnson and his trilogy. Rian has been unbelievably busy with Knives Out and the deal he made with Netflix for multiple movies. And as far as I know, this is the first sort of official comment about the Rian Johnson trilogy in years out of Lucasfilm, other than what Rian Johnson himself tends to say when asked about it, which echoes Kennedy's comments here, that he's just way too busy and just hasn't had a chance to get to it yet. Even though I think we all know it's never going to happen, that there's virtually no way they bring him back to do another movie, much less another trilogy, after how divisive The Last Jedi was. Not to mention, again, Kennedy basically shoots down the idea of Star Wars films being in the trilogy format going forward anyway. Either way, or to kind of summarize, I think the couple things that are clear from this article, or the general or main takeaways, should be that Star Wars is no longer much of a film franchise anymore, that they have no idea what to do with the movies going forward, which you would honestly think would have seen Kathleen Kennedy replaced as president, that while Marvel continues to have billion-dollar box office hits, Lucasfilm isn't even putting out Star Wars films. That it's been 2.5 years since the last one we got, which was, of course, The Rise of Skywalker. I'm also rather surprised to hear them moving away from the trilogy format, that they're not going to run with this idea that the films could be these large epic events that come out maybe once a year or once every other year, and that you build up to them. Say you build up to something like an Avengers movie or an Avengers Endgame, which is the biggest film of all time. And that they're instead embracing this idea, or seem to be embracing the idea, of more one-off films, despite a 50-50 success ratio at the moment. And despite there being a blueprint in place, again, from Marvel, about how to intertwine the shows and movies, and that, again, it seems to be what people want and enjoy. It all just feels strange to me that in one breath they talk about how it's all one big story and they understand that's what the fans want, but they somehow can't yet figure out how that story could and should also include the upcoming films, which, again, is, in the mind of many fans, the very foundation of Star Wars, or what Star Wars just really is to them. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what the future of Star Wars should look like. What do you think it should look like? Should the films and shows become one? Should there be a sort of merger similar to how the MCU does it? Should we get more trilogies in the future? Or do you like the idea of one-off Star Wars story-type movies? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.